Welcome to Dialogue, a true crime conversation. I'm your host, Rebecca Sebastian, and this is the interview podcast where I speak with the leading voices in crime, culture, and justice. So, Russia. Heard about it lately? That's an awkward way to start an intro, but I don't really know how else to bring up Russia on this podcast. And if it feels like a stretch, I'm hoping today's interview might change your mind. So we are starting a new series, New Books in True Crime. So we're going back to a reading club for the next few weeks. I will be speaking with an author of a brand new, either about to hit the market book or has just hit. So you're going to be hearing about books most people haven't read but are available for pre-order, including today's. So back to Russia. With everything going on in the world, I've been feeling like I should probably brush up on Russian and American history. And right when I started thinking about this, an interview request with the author of a new book called A Spy in Plain Sight, The Inside Story of the FBI and Robert Hanssen, America's Most Damaging Spy, fell into my inbox. That interview request was for an author named Lis Wiehl. Now, why did Liss write this book? Well, she's more than qualified. She is a third-generation federal prosecutor. She's authored 20 books in the true crime, historical crime, and mystery genres, including one on Manson called Hunting Charles Manson, which of course I have already ordered. Liss is also a regular commentator on CNN. She appears often on CBS, NPR, and other news outlets. And for 15 years, she was a legal analyst on Fox News, as well as a co-host on The Radio Factory. She was a tenured law professor at the University of Washington School of Law. And prior to this, she was a legal analyst and reporter for NBC News and NPR's All Things Considered. Again, this is why she wrote the book, but there's even more personal reasons why she wrote this book, and those you'll have to wait to hear about in the interview. This book reads like a TV show, if that makes sense, which is to say it's captivating from page one. I didn't feel like I was doing a history class refresher. It is so good, so please check my show notes for links on where you can find this book. Go to my Instagram to see the gorgeous cover of it. And with that, let's go straight to the source, Lis Wiehl herself, to learn about this spy, Robert Hanssen. What a terrible traitor and weirdo he really was. Let's kill the small talk. Liss, welcome to Dialogue Podcast. I'm mostly excited, tiny bit nervous to talk to you today.
You shouldn't be nervous at all. It's going to be fun.
It is going to be fun because your book, which we're going to get deep into, A Spy in Plain Sight, it starts out really fun. And the nerves, I will tell you, are because, you know, it's about American history and Russian history, and a part of it that I feel like I missed or didn't get the full memo. I don't know where I was that day in high school. So whenever I see a really compelling but historical true crime story, I'm like, I really want to do this, but I really don't want to blow it. So thanks for being conversational about it. I'm so excited to ask you some questions, but let's start with why I think you might be uniquely positioned to write such a book, given your family background and the careers and the legacy within your own family. Can you start there for us?
Sure. Well, I'm a third-generation federal prosecutor. My dad was one before me and my grandfather before him. And my great-grandfather, I think, was a sheriff. So there's definitely law enforcement in my family. And of course, he was also an FBI agent, my father was.
Yes.
And so I grew up hearing about stories about good guys and bad guys and catching the bad guys and putting them away and wearing the white hat. You know, they were just stories. And of course, I learned later they were stories about real people and things that had happened and how my dad had tried to help, either as an FBI agent or as a prosecutor. And I guess it was just sort of ingrained in me. My mother is a English school teacher, so she was always correcting my grammar. Wow. So between the two of them, I think I was just doomed to write mysteries and stories about the law, right?
Yeah, destined or doomed, I guess, depending on how you look at it.
One or the other, it was just going to happen. What that does, Rebecca, is there's something called the federal family, which it sounds like the mafia, but it's not. It's just that when you're part of the federal family, you've got your badge, you're either a prosecutor, you're an FBI agent, you're a DEA agent, anything like that. People know who've also done it, kind of know the trials and tribulations about it. And so when I'm calling as a journalist to get interviews with people in the FBI, CIA, for example, I lead with that.
Sure.
And so if I'm cold calling, and so it really does help kind of get people not to hang up on me. So they know that I've worked with them before. I've also written books having to do with the FBI, the Unabomber, the book before this one, really treated the FBI, I think, fairly, how they handled the Unabomber investigation, both good and bad. And so I've got a bit of a track record with the community. And so they won't hang up the phone quite so quickly. They'll talk to me. And that is imperative when you're trying to get leads for a story like this one or anything else that's historical in nature.
Yeah, it's almost like street credibility, and it gives you just a little bit
It's like
better of a leg to stand on.
Exactly.
So let's paint the scene a little bit. We've kind of buried the lead here. This is the inside story of the FBI and Robert Hanssen, America's most damaging Russian spy. Now, he will probably be a familiar figure to most. There have been several books written. I find yours, which admittedly is the only one I've almost finished reading, unique. And I want to know, why did you feel another book was needed, and what angle were you coming from that maybe hadn't been explored previously?
Well, I think some time needed to pass between when he was arrested 20 years ago and now, and the agents that were involved, were it was very emotionally wrought at that time. And so to take now, from the prism of 20 years he's been arrested, what have we learned? What can this happen again? All of those things, they needed to ruminate, I think, with these folks, the people that were closest to the case, before they could really talk about the full panoply of what happened. And I also stumbled into some kind of interesting secrets about the CIA agent who was accused before Hanssen. He actually started up a correspondence with Hansson's brother-in-law. So it's a very unique sort of thing that they would have this correspondence, and nobody had seen that before. But Mark Walk, the brother-in-law, gave that to me. And it showed kind of this correspondence between he and the CIA agent, and they were thinking what were the plots were going on, and none of that has been talked about before in a book. So I just felt like there was new information, and also the time to ruminate was really important between when it happened and now, and you get a more thorough and really freshly researched look at the Hanssen case.
And your research, a couple years was it to create this whole story?
Yeah. It's coming up May 3rd, and I think I've been working on it. I think I got started on it 3 summers ago.
Before we go into the beginning of the book, because I love how you start it, I wondered if you could set the scene of when Hansson's espionage began. And it had, his career as a spy was a couple of decades, right?
2 decades, right? He started in the 1980s.
Yeah.
And it was really, as simple as writing a letter to a person that became his handler in the Russian embassy saying, here's who I am. He didn't say who I was. He didn't identify himself even as an FBI agent. But he said, I have all of this knowledge. You can check with other sources. And here, let me give you, do you want to start this relationship? Basically, he initiated it. And he hadn't been in the FBI very long when he did that. So, it was crazy. But he was uniquely positioned within the counter-espionage, assigned to Russia department, and also IT. He was really good at IT and computers. And, the FBI agents I talked to self-admittedly said, we're kind of knock down doors, arrest kind of guys. We're not interested that much in computers. So Hanssen really capitalized on that because he had all the information, had all the databases, and he was able to, crazy things, Rebecca. He copied top secret information on a Xerox machine in front of everybody else and carried it out, it wouldn't be done that way today, but that's not what's done then. It's crazy.
Yeah, and I would imagine even more so today, as we're all a little more computer literate. Back then, you would just trust the people who were ahead of the curve, and he had that edge, and that really was something he got to utilize.
That's right. And you said it, trust, right? The FBI is built on trust. If once you're in and you're an agent, everybody trusts that you're working for the same goal, i.e. protecting the American public. And here was a guy that obviously wasn't and hurt us. But the FBI, because it was built on this idea of trust, it should be trust and verify, right? But trust, he wasn't polygraphed. There were no financial disclosures required of him, anything like that. That's changed now. And even when I was a prosecutor, after 5 years, you had to go through another background check. That never happened with Hanssen for 20 years. So anyway, that's how he started. It was just a letter to the Russian.
So did a lot of these changes that were implemented later in the Bureau, were they as a direct result of Hanssen, or was it kind of a conglomerate of things that happened around the same time?
They were primarily a direct result of Hanssen because it was front page news. Obviously, it was a big national story, and the FBI had complete egg on their face. So they did implement these other procedures, post Hanssen, such as polygraph tests for FBI agents, background checks for FBI agents, financial disclosures, credit checks, that kind of thing, that hopefully will do something towards catching spies. But as my sources said, not enough if somebody really wants to do it.
Okay, so I'm skipping ahead to a question that's later because it's a little more meta, but if someone really wants to do it, why do you think that is? What is the motivating factor? It seemed to be very financially driven for Hanssen. He was sort of living this kind of bougie lifestyle, comparative live to his colleagues. He chose a nicer neighborhood. He was doing the Catholic school for kids. Eventually, there was a lot of financial pressure. So do you think that was the primary motivator? And what else do you think it takes for a spy to step out and do that?
It's one of the motivators. I don't know that it would ever be the single motivator. It wasn't for Hanssen. I mean, I spoke with his psychiatrist who examined him multiple times, several times a week for over a year.
Yeah.
Arrest. And a lot came out of that. I mean, it wasn't just money. I mean, you definitely said it was partially money, and that's a big part of it. But it was also this feeling for Hanssen. He wanted to be the smartest guy in the room. Mm-hmm. He wanted to show everybody he was so smart. He thought the FBI agents, most of them were dullards, not that bright. And so it's a way of showing, look how good I am. Look how smart I am. Look, I have access to this. He wanted appreciation, which he wasn't getting at the FBI, and that the Russians gave him. They called him their friend, their dear friend, all of this stuff, very flowery letters back from the Russians. So I think he felt this sense of belonging and love even, wow. But certainly a pat on the back that he wasn't getting at the FBI. I think that was all part of it. I think he even rationalized to himself that perhaps he was doing this for the better good because he was showing the Russians where our weaknesses are, and that will help us shore up our weaknesses. I mean, it makes no sense. I mean, sure. But he probably had to justify it some way in his own head. Justified it some way. And I think these spies do. They justify it some way. Yeah. So sure, it's financial, and that was important, but it's not the only motivator, maybe not even a primary motivator.
Yeah, I wonder how common did that psychiatrist talk about a typical profile? I mean, this is a con artist. I mean, a very serious level of con.
Very serious level, right?
Fraud and con. So I'm sure it's just a hyper exaggerated, whatever that through line is in that type of person at this level to do this with national security on the line.
Exactly. And there isn't one profile.
Yeah.
The things that we've mentioned, the self-aggrandization, the ego, the narcissism, the needing to be accepted, the financial gain. I think even the thrill, because Hanssen, his idol when he was growing up was James Bond. And, he wanted to be this James Bond character, rescuing damsels in distress and, dealing with all this top secret stuff. And I think he fashioned himself that way. So for him, that was another big deal, another big part of it, his persona.
So I really do want to talk about the beginning of the book because I was so delighted at just how captivating it was that I didn't feel like I was doing homework or going back to read a history text. It really was just such a great opening scene. So we're in this Catholic school, father-son, kind of like an awards banquet night.
It's basically graduation for Louis Freeh's son, right? Yes. Louis Freeh was the director of the FBI and running this covert operation to find who the mole was. At that point, they realized that the mole was in the FBI, not the CIA.
Right.
So they were running this covert operation called Gray Suit. And imagine, right? Louis Freeh, who is really full of integrity. That's what he's based his whole reputation on. And he's speaking to this group of young men and their parents about ethics in government and integrity. That's his core of his speech. And in the front row right there is Hanssen with his son and Bonnie, his wife, sitting right there, knowing Hanssen doesn't have a clue at this point that they know who he is and that they're going to take him down. They've already instituted this plan to take him down. And he's sitting there, and Louis Freeh has to stand up and make this speech, which should be such a momentous, exciting, event for the whole family. And imagine the consternation that he must have had inside, the rage, he told me, the rage he had inside, looking at this man who they were going to take down. And he had destroyed his family, his son, his wife, Bonnie, everybody. And that anger, but all centered in Opus Dei, which is the very Catholic regime at this school, graduation ceremony. I mean, that's crazy to think of, but he did it. He pulled it off, and Hanssen was there and probably shook his hand, and no big deal.
I mean, it's wild. It's cinematic, honestly. It's wild that it happened. So Robert Hanssen attends the same school with his son, so he's there. Right. And I'm imagining everything you're saying, and yeah, all the inner monologue that must be going on. But also, in a way, I wonder if he almost pointed his speech at Hanssen. It's like, here is my keynote address on ethics and government.
And Hanssen is sitting right there.
Yeah.
But you got to realize, Hanssen he was self-delusional and narcissistic. I don't think he had a clue sitting there that this was going to happen to him. And I don't think he didn't have a clue because he made a last drop, right?
Yeah.
To the Russian. And that's when he was arrested, because the FBI knew he was their guy from evidence that they couldn't admit in a courtroom. So they had to kind of set up a sting operation to bring Hanssen down in the last 4 or 5 months before he was going to retire. So there was all that kind of drama going on as well. So Free knew all of this. He'd been leading the charge on all of it and had to make that speech in front of him. And pulled it off brilliantly. Yeah,
what an extraordinary moment to just kind of know your assignment, and this is what you have to do with all of that other background stuff going on that nobody else can know about. I mean, it's such a huge responsibility. Okay, so this was towards the end of Hanssen's spy career. Can you just walk us back? Now's when I want to go into history class a little. What did we know about espionage in terms of Russia and the United States at the point when Hanssen was starting, and how did that evolve over that 20 years?
Well, we were still in the Cold War with the Russians at that point in the 1980s when Hanssen started his spying. And he spied productively for him for a while until his wife, Bonnie, one day was looking through their drawers and found all this cash, like $5,000 in a sock drawer, basically.
Yeah.
And so she confronts him. She doesn't know what it is. Is this for a mistress? Is this, something else? And he admits to her that he's spying for the Russians. So they go to a priest to figure out what to do. They don't go to the FBI. They go to a priest. The priest, and this is what unbelievable to me, the priest says to them basically, well, what you did was wrong, but you can pay your penance and be okay with the Lord and everybody else by just, paying the church some money, which Hanssen did. So that got him off the hook with his wife and the church, to which he converted when he married Bonnie. And all was, good for him. He kind of lay low for a little bit while we were going through the machinations of the Cold War and how that changed his Russian contacts. But after that, he was back in it. The 1990s, he spied the entire decade as Russia changed, from one kind of entity to another.
Yeah.
And they got out of the Cold War.
Hey, everyone. Rebecca here. It's that time again. We are gearing up for CrimeCon 2022. This year, the event will be held in Las Vegas, and the dates are April 29th to May 1st. I am already hard at work prepping my table for Podcast Row, and I'm involved in a couple of other exciting aspects of the event, and I really hope to see you there. Now, if you use the code DIALOGUE, that's DIEALOGUE, you'll get 10% off your regular standard pass. So go to crimecon.com to register, and again, use this code DIALOGUE, DIEALOGUE, for 10% off your pass. I hope to see you in Vegas. Going back to the Catholic Church for a minute, did they ever face prosecution for taking that money with that knowledge? Is there any recourse for that?
No, I don't think anything ever happened with that. And I don't think the father is alive anymore. It's crazy. If Bonnie had caught him as she did, and he confessed, at that point, it could have been over, right? If she'd gone to the authorities, to anyone, but she didn't do that. And then this absolution from the priest, which is, what she was looking for, because she's very, very Catholic, made it like it's okay. So probably again, that gave Hanssen the moral high ground to go forward.
Do you assign any blame to her for not being more of a whistleblower?
Yeah, Rebecca, that's a really interesting question. I do. I mean, I think at that point, if we were to ask ourselves, if we found our partner with this money and he said this is what he was doing, I know I would turn them in, even though that would be difficult, right?
Yeah.
I think you would. I think most of us would. But she was very controlled by Hanssen.
Mm-hmm.
He told her what her politics were. It was kind of like, be quiet. When I want your opinion, I'll give it to you kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, and it was this was now back in the 80s. I don't think she was working. I think she was raising the kids. I mean, that's working, but I don't think she was working outside the home.
Right.
And maybe she felt trapped, and maybe she felt like, I'm trying to give her the benefit of the doubt here.
Totally.
Maybe she felt trapped. Maybe she felt like when she caught him and the priest gave that absolution, that it was over and he was going to do it again. And he didn't for a while. But that was not because of her. That was because there was just, changes in Russia. So do I blame her? Not really in that position. I do think it's amazing that she's getting, Hansson's pension. The FBI gave her pension. And
wow.
Yeah. And per her plea agreement, though, she can't talk to anyone. So I was able to find out where she is. Mm-hmm. But per her plea agreement, she can't talk. Either can Hanssen. So we'll never know anything else that they're ever going to say ever again. Because the FBI, debriefed them both extensively, got information, I'm assuming, that they were looking for, and then had to shut both of them down so they never speak again to the press, anybody else.
Wow. And he is serving a life sentence. How old is he?
He was born in 54. So that makes him close to 70. To 70.
Almost 70.
Almost 70. Yeah. And he was looking at execution because it's a death penalty. I mean, espionage is death penalty. You are a traitor against your government. It's death penalty. But the FBI made a decision then and there at post-arrest, if he was cooperative, which he was, and if Bonnie was cooperative, to give him life in prison without the possibility of parole to get that information.
Sure.
And that was controversial at the time. Free weighed in on that, as did the Attorney General, as did the President. But I do agree with their position because he's not going to do any more harm. He's right there. He's locked up. But we needed to get the information that he'd given over and anything else that, was going on. So trading the information for his life was probably the better move for both parties. Sure.
No, I would agree. And it's federal prison for a crime at that level, I would imagine, is not amazing.
No, he's hanging out with the Unabomber. It's the same facility that just, it's a supermax prison in Colorado. Wow. He's not going anywhere.
Yeah. And their children are grown adults now.
One is an assistant professor somewhere. So it seems like the kids have come out okay. But imagine every Father's Day, every Hanssen birthday, they can't be there. They're not going to be there.
Oh, so, yeah. And to be related to a figure of American history who's a villain of American history.
Oh, he's an absolute 100% villain.
Yeah.
I mean, he caused the death of many of our Russian assets. And this is important because, and we were talking about history, right? Part of the way that the government, our government, is able to find out what's going on in other countries, Russia, for example, and to potentially thwart any plans against us, is to use double agents in Russia. Right. So the FBI goes and they turn people. It's part of their job in the counter-espionage, big part of their job, to turn Russians who are in the intelligence community, kind of like a Hanssen, turn a Hanssen, right, and get spies for us. And what Hanssen was doing was divulging all of our secrets about who those people were. So you can imagine what the Russians did with those people. They executed them.
Yeah.
So he signed the death warrant for a lot of our assets.
Yeah. The reality of his actions, there were deaths, there was violence, there, really far reaching implications that are quite hard to imagine. And there's some scenes that are quite horrifying to learn about.
Yeah. And the ramifications were felt for years and probably still are. And even in the sense of, other people can look to a Hanssen and go, hey, he got away with it for 20 years. He made all this money. Maybe I can do that too.
Oh, yeah.
So maybe that's the only reason it wasn't good to execute him. But other than that,
right.
like going back to my earlier comments, now I think about it, it's like, wait a second, if they'd executed him, that would have been more deterrence. But
I do wonder. That's a good question. And that leads me to, I've been wondering, do you think it's easier or harder to be a spy for the American government right now in 2022?
Harder in the sense that there are these protections now, the polygraphs, all these things we talked about, but easier, much easier in that we're in the digital age.
Yeah.
And you can download lots of secrets on a thumbnail and just walk on out. You don't have to be sitting there at the Xerox machine, with piles and piles of paper and walking out of the FBI office.
Yeah.
So I think it's easier in some ways. And we talked earlier about motivations. The motivations are still there, right? The motivations are just human. Yes. Money, pats on the back, James Bond thrill, all of that. Those are very human emotions.
Yep.
That aren't just, buried with Hanssen or in prison with Hanssen. And the crazy thing, Rebecca, is that you asked about things I learned in this book. Major one that I learned that I was actually shocked about was, I don't know why I started doing this, but with every person I interviewed, I asked them, towards the end of the interview, I said, could there be another Hanssen today? It was kind of a throwaway question, honestly, at first, but the responses I started getting were yes, emphatic yes. And then you do the follow-up, which is, is there one now? And the answer was probably yes, but there probably is already an infiltration in the FBI. And these are from seasoned FBI and CIA agents who are either still in the bureau and the agency, or very recently retired, who were very, very senior. These are the top people at the top level. So, and it wasn't just like one or two, Rebecca. Everybody that I asked in the know said absolutely, and yeah, there probably could be. And then of course the follow-up is why and motivation, and they're the same motivations.
Humans, yeah, from the dawn of time, yeah.
So they said that shocked me.
It is shocking. Also sounds incredibly stressful to imagine working in that environment. If that is a common way of thinking and a perception that this is likely true, how difficult must it be to let your guard down, to know who to trust in this place where you should be so united?
Yeah, you're trusting your lives.
Yeah.
Like your life on other agents. You're out there in the field, they're going to cover you. And who could it be and all of that. And think about it in today's terms with what's going on in Ukraine and the Russians.
Yes, of course.
Our intelligence as to what's happening and what the Russians are doing and planning vis-a-vis us. I mean, cyber attacks, all of this kind of stuff. Nuclear is not even ruled out.
I know.
With a crazy man like Putin. So we need more than ever to have really good, solid intelligence with integrity that the president and other people can rely on to make our plans. So it's even more daunting and frightening that those answers that I got, that this could be happening right now. Think about what another Hanssen could be doing to our intelligence right now in the FBI or the CIA.
It is wild to me too that your book is the timing of it and the launch right in this moment. I know obviously not planned, but just so interesting that we're all just talking about Russia again. And that's why when we first started talking, I was like, God, I have to understand history more, because the state of the world has forced me to kind of come out of my bubble, my very privileged bubble of not living through an experience that could be like, the precipice of a war or something. It's
right. And to be fair to you, I mean, Russia really hasn't been in the news.
No.
Now, obviously it is, but before it was China's incursions.
Yes.
North Korea.
Right.
Russia was just kind of out there. We didn't think about it. But Putin's been mulling this for a long time and planning. Yeah. And that's my point, too, about the assets. And, again, critical to get our infiltration into Russian intel so we know what's going on and have an idea. So we're not just, bombarded and have no idea where it's coming from. Yeah. It's critical to be able to keep those assets. And the last thing you want, of course, is somebody in there, squealing on our Russian double agents and blowing up our operations,
Oh my gosh.
especially at a time like this in our world.
Yeah. Do you think there's some like extra measures happening above and beyond new protocol that was already established within the Bureau? Can you even say?
I think what they're doing now is they're more on a need to know basis on certain things.
Mm-hmm.
And so they'll have a group that, a smaller group instead of everybody talking about it. But problem is with that, again, human nature, right? We know that Hanssen got some of his information just in carpools, just random carpools
Right.
with other agents and, gossip and talking. How do you get that out?
Yeah. Because that's also human nature. Yeah. That's like the innocent side of human nature, to like connect and share and debrief.
I can't believe this, or, this guy in Russia is doing that. Can you believe it? I mean, and just that trust being there. So I hope that they are really on a need to know basis and not sharing, but I fear that just human nature makes it so that doesn't happen, so that there are leaks. And again, if people read this and the public is more aware of what can happen and what has happened, the FBI itself, knowing that the public is more aware, may become more hypervigilant themselves. Because this was a horrible stain on the FBI when they had to admit that it wasn't a CIA agent. It was one of their own that they were investigating. And, the embarrassment, the humility, all of that.
Yeah.
I mean, you talked about earlier, in the beginning about this black stain on the FBI. They don't want that again.
Right. Can you briefly talk about the man who the FBI thought was the spy before they found out it was actually Hanssen?
CIA agent, Brian Kelly. And kind of destroyed his life. I mean, here was this agent who was, with the CIA, which means you can't tell a lot to your family anyway.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden now his family thinks he is the worst and most notorious spy this country has ever seen for the Russians. And he's a good guy. He's a good guy. He didn't do anything. In fact, he was such a good agent that's why they kind of pinned it on him. They thought, well, he was involved in this case, and that case, and this case, and he had all this access. Well, it was because he was a good agent, but Hanssen must have just loved that.
Oh, right. Did he have a redemption arc, Brian Kelly?
Yes. He was, when Hanssen was arrested, they kept him twisting in the wind during this whole sting operation. But when he was arrested, then it was obviously not Hanssen. The FBI was very slow in issuing a formal apology. Patricia Kelly, who I talked to, Brian's widow, said, they sort of apologized. They sent a letter kind of with an apology, but not really. And he then, after that, he taught at the FBI, he taught at the academy, but he was never really the same. And Patricia said that one day she left for work. She is a trial attorney, left for work, and he was sleeping. She came back and he had been dead the whole time. So he died fairly young. And Patricia, his widow, thinks, it was definitely incurred by the stress and the anxiety and the, just utter failing of the FBI to get the right guy and what it put this man through.
It's brutal. And I would imagine it's very hard for an institution like the FBI to over apologize for something. I imagine humility on that level, especially when their objective is the greater good of safety. And so they got the right guy. So in their mind, it was probably almost like the ends justified the means.
Exactly.
I'm projecting, but I would imagine there's got to be that kind of thinking.
Yes. And also the FBI is not good at making apologies.
Just in general. I mean, most of us are. So I would like to ask you, because you've written 20 books?
This is my 20th.
This is your 20th. Congratulations. That's incredible.
Thanks.
How do you choose your subjects? A lot of your books really focus and go really deep in on a person, a figure of a place and time. What draws you, and how do you know what you want to work on?
I'm interested in evil and why evil works and what are the motivations, like we talked about. And I would say Hanssen is evil. And I also, though, look for stories and subjects where they're historical in nature, but they're important now, right? Unabomber was historical in nature, but important now because of the message against computers, all of this. People still buy into that a lot. And I wanted to try to dispel some of that. So it's important. The figure is important now. I think Hanssen is important now. The lessons that the FBI did or didn't learn are going to be critical to us going forward for all the reasons we've talked about, for us needing to get that Russian intel and not have those agents subverted. Hanssen may be arrested and he's doing time for the rest of his life, but his legacy remains. And we have to learn the lessons from history, lest we repeat them, right? We don't want to repeat this. So all these stories, it's historical, but we have to learn these lessons because there are important lessons in all of them. And I do try to write, and thank you for saying that you didn't think it was a history book, because it is historical, but I want it to be fun. I mean, I write murder mysteries too. So I wrote it kind of in short chapters and digestible pieces, and keep it's
so readable,
moving, right?
Yes, absolutely. I encourage everyone to read it. I've ordered your Hanssen book. I'm going to go back and read your mysteries. I'm a fan now, so
thank you.
Thrilled to meet you. Thank you for killing the small talk on Dialogue, and you're welcome back anytime.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. You have a wonderful day, and say hi to your dog for me.
Thank you. Dialogue is a Yellow Tape Media production, audio engineered by Jason Usry, and produced, hosted, and edited by me, Rebecca Sebastian. If you love the podcast, please consider becoming a diehard by signing up at patreon.com/dialogue. Other ways to support the show: follow along on social media. We are at Dialogue Pod across platforms, and you can now watch most episodes on YouTube by subscribing to my channel, Rebecca Sebastian. For more information or to drop me a note, visit RebeccaSebastian.com. Until next time, thank you for listening and killing the small talk.